Welcome to Africa Media Australia. I'm Claude Sharwadi. Thank you very much for watching this video. We've been off air for quite some time, but we're back and we're glad to continue to publish more videos and more articles in relation to African Australian communities. Today we're talking about an incident that took place recently in Melbourne where a young South Sudanese lady was murdered. The lady's name was Natalina Angok, living in Geelong, and she was found dead in Melbourne in Chinatown, and the killer, or at least the person who's been charged for the death of that woman, his name is Alan Bell. This is obviously a very sad incident when obviously somebody loses their lives. There are a lot of issues here. Apparently the person who has been charged with the murder of that lady has been reported to be his partner. They've been together in a relationship for about 18 months. It's unclear what led to the killing of Natalina Angok. The person was presented recently at court and has been charged. Now, there are questions that this incident raises. I see particularly three questions. There's a prevalence of mental illness in the society, prevalence of violence against women. That's the second issue. And a third issue is media coverage about violence and criminality in the society. Let's talk about mental illness. It appears to me that this is really obviously a very critical issue, and it looks like wherever you look, there are people suffering with mental illness to different degrees, but the whole of the country is pretty much becoming like some sort of asylum for people suffering from mental illness. Some obviously have more serious conditions such as schizophrenia. Others have less serious conditions. But the prevalence of mental illness in Australia is something that needs to be given more attention. And I'm very sure that it will continue to cause issues in the future. Now, when you look at what has been said in the media, I think there is one thing that has not been said very clearly. Obviously, most media have condemned the killing, but they've said, well, this guy is schizophrenic. He was just recently released from a mental health facility where he was receiving treatment. Apparently, he stopped taking his medication, which is why he ended up killing this lady. But there are serious questions that have not been asked at this stage. If this guy was released recently from a mental health facility where he was receiving treatment, does it mean that he was prematurely released, that he wasn't treated properly, and it was a mistake to release him without proper protocol to ensure that he will continue to receive treatment and to be taken care of, or at least to be monitored for some time until he was well enough to reintegrate the community? I think that question has not been asked enough. When you read what's happening in the media, it's just that this is a sad incident. This person is sick, mentally sick, and therefore kind of there's not much that can be done. But I think we need to look into under what circumstances this person was released from the mental health facility where he was being treated, and whether he may have been released prematurely and he was a danger to the community when he was released. This needs to be looked at, and we have to ask these questions, because just imagine that this was the other way around, that the victim was a Caucasian person, Caucasian lady, and the perpetrator, the killer, was a South Sudanese male. Just imagine what that would look like in the media here in Australia, because obviously the media is still quite racist. We just have to call things the way they are. Even though in the broader Australian society there is, a very minimal level of racism, but in the media it's still there, and the media is just looking for any opportunity to voice their, racist and anti-immigrant discourse, especially the Murdoch press. If this was a South Sudanese, young boy killing a Caucasian lady in Australia, it would be something that would be all over the media for days, if not weeks, and it would not just be an issue of the person being responsible for their act. It will be linked to their community, to their race, to the import, so to speak, of refugees from Africa to Australia. I mean, if you've been in Australia for a while, you would know what type of stuff we read in the media in such circumstances. I think, us as the African community ought to be able to ask more questions when we are victims of violence, because when we are perpetrator of violence, we get condemned, we get flagged, we get bashed in the media by all sorts of people, journalists, reporters, and politicians, and all other commentators. So it's important that we ask these questions. The second thing is about the prevalence of violence against. So the second thing is about the prevalence of violence against women. Now, again, this is an issue that is quite serious within the Australian society. I know there's quite a bit of attention being placed to this, and there's a lot of government programs. Part of this issue is linked to the first issue that I mentioned, which is about mental illness. We know that in Australia, in fact, compared to Africa, many male here are not all that violent. They are pretty, the women wear the pants inside houses, and men pretty much accept everything women say in Australia. That's the culture. The women are the boss, and men pretty much just take what women say. But how come it is that a lot more men are being violent against the women? Is it linked? Is it something cultural? Is it a social phenomenon? Is it linked to mental illness? Is it some type of frustration because men have lost their pants inside the house, and they want to somehow recover some sort of strength in different ways and end up being violent? I'm not a specialist in this issue, I have to admit, but I'm asking questions as a journalist. It is important that this issue continues to attract more interest, more focus from the right people with the right expertise. And when it comes to our community, we ought to be able to provide the right input, because a lot of these experts you see in many circles, political and government circles, have no clue about our communities. So we ought to be able to inform them properly, and especially these things, because they are linked to our culture, they become quite complicated, because, we live in a multicultural society. We don't have to take everything that the Caucasian aspect of the Australian culture gives to us. We have our own. Now, I'm not in any way encouraging violence against women. I am condemning it and looking for some more serious solutions. But I also need to say that a lot of these policies, a lot of these programs, the way they're being handled, they do not contain, or they do not include sufficient multicultural insights, and they are not implemented appropriately. So these are issues that need to be looked at, and we need to continue to discuss this more broadly throughout our communities and other relevant circles. The third issue in this thing is about media coverage. I guess I touched a little bit on this earlier when I said that just imagine if the killer was South Sudanese male and the victim was a Caucasian Australian lady. The media is biased. The media, when it comes to act of violence perpetrated by Caucasian Australians, usually it's mental illness. When violence is committed by a Caucasian person, it is an individual matter. When it is committed by a black person, an African, or even a Muslim, it ceases to be individual. It becomes a community problem, it becomes a race problem, a religious problem. We need to point to the failures, the exaggerations, and the issues relating to the media when we see it. The media needs to stop really drumming up acts of violence that are perpetrated by blacks, by Africans, by Muslims. There is a racial undertone There's a discrimination in most of this media reporting when it is about people of color, and when it is about Caucasian person, nobody talks about where they come from, their race, their community, and all that type of thing. So it is important that we raise these issues and that we are more conscious of them. All right, folks, that's all we've got for today. We would appreciate your comment, your suggestions, and please share this video for your network. Help inform and educate the broader African Australian community. Till next time, stay blessed.